Hello, everybody. Welcome. I hope you're doing well. Thank you so much for joining us. So we're going to get started just to, and if other people come in as we're going, that's great, but we only have an hour and we want to be respectful of your time. So I do want to encourage you to turn on your camera just to, so we don't feel like we're just talking to the void, all the black boxes. So today you're joining us for Reframing Your Skills from Academia to Industry. I'm Dr. Guadalupe Diaz-Lara. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Child and Adolescent Studies. And my co-presenter, I will let her go ahead and introduce herself.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Susie Beltran-Grimm. I'm a postdoctoral research associate at Purdue University, and I'm really excited to be here with you all.
Yeah. And in a little bit, we're going to tell you a little bit more about ourselves, and you could say why we're qualified to tell you these and share these things with you. So we want to let you know, we have two specific learning goals that we want. This is what we want you to get out of the workshop. We want you to be able to describe other employment opportunities outside of traditional academia. What do those look like? Where are they at? Where can you find them? As well as to explain to you and give you some examples of how to reframe your skills to fit non-academic positions. So we'll go over those, and we'll have an activity to give you a chance to practice and to look over your own documents. Susie, could you monitor the chat?
Sure.
I still can't open it. So let me know if there's other questions. So first, I just want to share with you a little bit of what does my professional trajectory look like and research, and maybe in many ways of why do I know, why should you listen to what I say? So I have a PhD in human development and family science that I got from Oregon State. And I was, when I was in graduate school, I was very much on this idea that I'm going to be a professor. But I was like, do I really want to be a professor? So I had a lot of that back and forth. And when I was in graduate school, I made the point to learn some skills and take on opportunities that sometimes other students don't want, but they're very transferable to other jobs, right? So I did a lot of data management. So I learned how to organize projects, how to manage people who get working with me, and I took that data management skills into I know how to manage a project. And I'll show you how in a little bit. I also did a lot of consulting for nonprofit schools and communities. And that where I would have to do research projects, but then take it and put them in a way where other people could understand. And that essentially means that a school district doesn't care if your project is significant at 0.05. What they want to know is what does it mean for their students, for the word that they're teaching, for their teachers. I also did a lot of workshops out in the community, parenting workshops, leadership workshops. I did a lot of trainings for pre-service teachers. And again, it was all developing skills that, presenting, public speaking, collaborating with others that could be translated to a market outside of academia. But, I was still very much on wasn't sure where I wanted to go. So I actually took a postdoc at UC Irvine in the School of Education. And it was a position that was project coordinator and postdoc. And then I wanted to leave that postdoc because I did not think I wanted to be in academia. So I started looking for jobs. And when I first started, I would say I was a postdoc. You know who understands what a postdoc is outside of academia? Nobody. So once I changed that to project coordinator, so even changing that language of my position at UCI is postdoc to my position at UCI is project coordinator, it made a huge difference. And so I ended up taking a position with a nonprofit that is called Sobrato Early Academic Language as a research associate in the research and evaluation department. I had to go through interviews, one that was myself and two people, and one that was a group interview. I still also consult with a lot of projects with nonprofits and community organizations. So we'll share some of that with you as well, but I will pass it on. And Susie, do you have a question?
Yeah, I have a question. I don't know if you want to answer questions right now, but Carlos has a question. He's asking, on your resume alone, wouldn't the actual title show up in a background check? So I'm guessing it's related to your mention about not using postdoc, but using project coordinator.
It doesn't. Even if it shows up and they ask what they're gonna do, and they're gonna call and they're gonna be like, are you actually employed here? Yes. So I've never had an issue with it. They didn't care. And I would say, I have this project coordinator / postdoc role. And what happens is that when I was just doing postdoc, nobody understands what that is. So if you add this like project coordinator / postdoc, or even if you project coordinator, I never had an issue into it, because what matters is that if they came back and said like, oh, this is different, they will call and they'll be like, yes, you do work here. And one of the persons that was my reference was my supervisor at this place. So it's not like she was gonna be like, no. And but I would say that all the skills and all the responsibilities that I described is what I was doing. It would have been an issue if I would have been like, I'm doing these other things and not actually do them. So you do want to be careful with those. Any other questions?
Yeah. No, so far, yeah.
Yeah, so I just want to share with you a little bit of what I do with my research. So I use a lot of quantitative and qualitative methods, and I mostly looked at kids' influences of what influences their educational experiences and development, as well as how parents access resources and their experiences at school. And I mostly focus on these three areas. So, and the reason why I've gotten so much practice about doing translational research is because my research is really not only about doing research, but how do you connect it to practice and policy and advocacy, so you have equity, access, and empowerment of the families that I work with. So I'll pass it on to Dr. Beltran-Grimm so she can tell you a little bit about her background.
Thank you, Lupe. And hi, everyone, again. A little bit similar to Lupe's trajectory with nonprofits and consulting, pretty similar to mine. I have an EDD, which is a Doctor of Education with a specialization in learning technologies for Pepperdine. But really what got me to that point was my community-based and practice work in nonprofit. So I did your bachelor's and your master's. Actually did public administration and policy at CSU Long Beach, because I thought I wanted it to stay in nonprofit and stay in public media. And then I decided that the more I got to write grants and I kept getting funding to do research, to do the work, the more I started to enjoy in the research part of it. And so I decided to do a postdoc, but I started a nonprofit with Parent Institute for Quality Education, which is a nonprofit organization that serves families, specifically Spanish-speaking Latina families. And I started from the bottom, a coordinator, have interviews. That job was about 1 year, and then I went into public media, and I lasted in public media about 9 years. That was the longest. And when I was doing my public media, I was doing my master's, and then I eventually went to do my Doctor of Education. And in public media, I went through this promotional phases of coordinator, manager, and eventually being the early learning director. But then at the same time, bringing everything that I was learning in a doctoral program to the actual practice is just really cool for me to sort of merge that practice work and that research work together. I love doing research, so I went to academia and I started a postdoc at Purdue University, where I continued to examine Spanish-speaking Latino families. So my sort of focus hasn't changed. It continues to be families. It continues to be qualitative methodologies, which is really interesting. We could talk about that, because I don't think you really need to change to go industry. I think it's just a way of how you reframe your skills and how you understand your skills as a researcher to either do industry or academia, because I think it works for both ways. And so my industry experience was very much applied community research, grant management, grant writing. I was pretty I don't want to say lucky, but we were pretty successful in getting some grants to actually do research and do programming implementation. So it was a lot of US research because it's public media. We did digital content too. And then we did workshops, and I also published, but it was non-traditional academic publishing, like the NSTA organization, which could be more accessible to communities. So you kind of get to do both of those things. And then for graduate school experience, it was really interesting because I was doing all the applied work in public media, and then I was going to graduate school and learning the theory and realizing, oh, this is what I do. It's just that we call it funds of knowledge, or we call it co-design methodologies, or we call it, your other theories of constructivists or constructivism. And so I was really excited to sort of like kind of get that theory behind it. And it was more about research, practicing research methods, learning how to do IRB, which in the industry, you don't really know that. So I was really interested to do that. It was really great to learn the IRB and then bring it back into practitioner work in nonprofits. So if you go to the next one, and really my focus, like I mentioned, is qualitative and participatory research design methods to really explore human development and context. And that could be for anyone, but my main focus is Spanish-speaking Latina families. So I really examine what are people understanding when you put content in front of them, when you want to create curriculum, when you want to create a website, when you want to create an ebook for them, and really co-designing also together to really understand that. And so that understanding that that's a skill of mine has been really successful for academic settings, but also for consulting purposes. If you go to the next one, I really engage or try to engage people in culturally informed approaches that really understand, again, not just my focus is Latina Spanish, but it could also be Black families, it could also be Asian American families to really understand and centering them through co-design methods. And so I take that skill that I develop, that I have, and I use it not only for my academic settings, but also an example would be a consulting job that I just did for Pique, which was my first job. And they reached out back to me asking if I could do a focus group to understand how families, Spanish-speaking Latino families, understand Common Core. And so I brought all of that into a consulting component. And I'll show you a report so you can see the difference between when you do research for academic, how do you frame your research tends to be more academic purposes for publishing versus for industry, you create a report with best practices that they can implement right away because that's what they're looking in industry. And so it's just a matter of really getting to know yourself, what you have and what you can bring to the table for your industry people, and knowing how to frame that so that you can sell yourself, if that makes sense. Like, how do you sell yourself to the organization? So I think if you go next, we go into...
I just wanted to add one thing to Carlos. If you're concerned about like not having your exact title, one of the things that I did really poorly at the beginning was to explain, like in my cover letter, what a postdoc was, right? Or what my roles were. So if you are concerned about like, because I get that, like the fear of the background check. It's not that I've ever done anything, but I still get nervous every time they ask for it or every time I have to sign it. So you could always put like your title / something else, and in your cover letter say, like I would think of saying, I serve as a postdoctoral fellow, in which my responsibilities are similar to those of a project coordinator who would do X, Y, and Z, right? I organized the project, I managed a staff of 10, it was my job to facilitate communication. So you could always do that as well. And I think when I started looking for jobs outside of academia, I didn't do a good job of that, of really, explaining what it is to other people. So we're going to start by just describing some of these employment opportunities. And Susie, is this one's yours, right?
Yeah. I mean, both of us, we both have this experience. So you can apply. I don't know if you're familiar with research organizations like WestEd, SRI, International, EDC. They're organizations that hire. You don't have to have a PhD. You could have a master's and really become a research associate there and engage in community-based, engage in NSF projects, engage in government projects to do research for all kind of different things. I know WestEd has a math initiative and they're trying to understand teaching math. I know SRI and EDC also work with public media as well, and they do digital research for PBS kids as well. There's also nonprofit organizations like Lupus organization before PIQE, the Parent Institute. They might not have a person in-house, a research person, but they might be looking for contract job, like I mentioned, the one that I'm doing with PIQE currently, and they really don't have that full capacity to hire someone full-time, so they're looking for consulting opportunities. And so that could look like, I said, research associate, research and evaluation manager, director of programming, public media. My role, I hire a evaluator person, but my role was mostly like developing, programming, really thinking about services. So I got to use that research background to do that. And then the person that did the evaluation really focused on designing the instruments, really project managing the interviews, things that we would do with parents. And so there's so many different ways that you can bring those research skills into industry. You could also become a research analyst for school districts and county offices that really look into see whether the programs that they're bringing into their settings are making an impact, right? And that feels more like a pre and post evaluation versus a UX research, which could be part of an idea organization, right? Like for-profit organizations that hire UX researchers to really understand how do people like us use a product and develop that product and create that product, right? And you could work for for-profit organizations like that one. So there's so many different levels where, again, I think it's a matter of learning what you bring to the table, owning those skills, and learning how to sell yourself, which will give you more information in a little bit.
Yeah, and even with for-profits, I just had a student who she was at a course that I was a guest lecturing at, and she now works for like a big like sports company, and I can't remember the name of it. And she was doing her master's in psychology, and she's now doing. I mean, she works for a for-profit organization and is doing research around how to best support diverse employees within that company. So we are starting to see that a lot of companies are starting to understand more the value of like research and people understanding research, or you doing, if you're writing a master's thesis, or if you are leading a project, right, depending on the requirements of your program. The other thing that I want to say is that it's important to understand that the differences of like the different types of companies that you're looking at, and I'm gonna just be really honest with all the like mistakes that I made. And so when I applied to work for SEAL, I did not, I think, fully understand the difference between a research center and a nonprofit, right? So when I was expecting to go into SEAL to do research and have the level of support that I had at the university. So when I was already hired, I was ready to start my program. There was two of us, the director of research and evaluation and myself. The nonprofit doesn't have an IRB. They didn't have access to articles, like we have in the library. They didn't have the funding to buy or to give me a stats program, a qualitative program. It was a very different level of resource in the type of work that they were doing. So where research centers are really focused on doing the research, the nonprofit, the research part of it was like secondary to their mission, right? Which is, now that I think about it, is like the obvious. But, so you want to do research into the company and really look into how they work and what kind of resources that they have, especially if you're going into a nonprofit setting, that sometimes they don't have those same levels of supports. Yeah. Any questions or any that you have specifically to your field? Susie and I are both within like development and education. So that's, a lot of examples that we have. But if you are within that field, one of the things too is to look at school districts, county offices, departments of education, and look at things like this: research associate, research analyst, policy analyst. There's also other ones that we're starting to see pop up that are looking for people who understand research. And sometimes it's not necessarily to do research, but it's that you know how to read research, right? Or that you know how to lead a project, or that you know how to write and understand, even looking up, doing a literature review or things like that. Any questions that you have? I don't see anything in the chat, and I don't think there was anything in the Jamboard. Let me see. I don't see anything here. And remember, this is really the chance for you to like ask questions. And if you have specific examples of like, what do you wanna do? This is really the time to ask. So can you guys see if I leave the PowerPoint this way? Because then I can actually see the chat. Yeah, is that okay? Okay. So we also want to give you some pros and cons to consider as you go from like academia to industry, and I'll let Susie talk about those.
Yeah, I mean, some of the pros and cons are very different than academia. One of the things that you'll probably see a little bit different is higher compensations are very different for organizations that are more industry. I do want to caution that for some nonprofits, even if you get to be a research person in a nonprofit, they might have a limited budget, so it's a little bit different, but they tend to be a little bit more higher than your regular academic job. Public media has very competitive salaries, as well as, the research think tanks that we mentioned, WestEp, SRI, and EDC, as well as other institutions that might not focus on education. Those are pretty different. The structured path forward, they have a structured path forward schedule that is also very differently. It tends to be very, like your 9 to 5, 8 to 5, which is helpful. Promotions can happen a bit quickly than in academia, that you have to take years to become a full professor or an associate professor. Whereas in industry, you could go from like a research associate, become a research analyst, a director of research, or eventually even a VP of research. I know there's some organizations that have that type of positions. There's also red tape. One of my favorite things that not my favorite things, one of the things that I tell people a lot, the difference between academia and working in public media was that reimbursement were really quick. Like logistics happened so quick. There was no, I have to ask permission for a credit card or ask permission to use this funding. Yes, even though we were federally funded, we still have to submit receipts and things like that, but it just happened faster than in academic settings. I'll give you an example. I'm still waiting for some reimbursements back in June. It's already October. Whereas in industry, it happened right away. You will submit your expense report and you will get it within like 1 week or 2 weeks, which is really great when you're using your own credit card or your own debit card, right?
The other thing too is that when I was at a nonprofit, they actually cover all of my expenses, my food, my mileage, my everything. We're here, the university often tells you, I'm going to give you $600. I also want to answer the question that Carlos has about wanting to be in finance. So I would encourage you to look at nonprofits. I have a friend that works at the nonprofit, I think he's still there, in like the business finance side of it. So I'm happy to connect you with them. But yes, it is true that nonprofits have a smaller budget, but I would encourage you to look. So as a postdoc, when I left, I was making $55 a year. When I moved over to the nonprofit, I was making $85 a year. And that was my startup salary, $85. And by that time I left, I was up for promotion to manager, which was going to be closer to 100,000. So you just have to look at the nonprofits, right? So I wouldn't put them out. The other thing is that you could look into like banks. One of the partner of one of our colleagues actually works within Merrill Lynch. So again, I'm happy to connect you with them. And we actually just helped them. Oh, I wish I would have thought of that. We actually just helped them put a resume together. That he had a resume for finance to put it into a way that he was applying for a position as a coordinator in the university, which, different fields. And we actually helped them take that resume and change all the finance language that, to a way that they could understand in education. So I'm happy to connect you with those two people, Carlos. If you just want to send me an email, I would follow up with both of them and you can meet with them and see, what opportunities might be out there. Because I totally get the kids one, like, and that's one of the things what I was really happy when I left as a postdoc, because now I was making almost $30,000 more, and it was so nice to have, money and not be broke every month. So, and the same goes for other of you. If you want to share kind of what you're looking for, both of us have a lot of connections that we might be able to connect you with people that can, might open up opportunities for you. Do you want to go over the cons?
Yeah. The cons could be mixed flexibility, right? Like it really depends. While you might have a structured path for work schedule, it also really depends to the levels that you get in that work. So as a coordinator, you might have a more structured 9 to 5. As a manager, now you're managing people. You might be on salary versus hourly. And then as a director, so now you're having way more meetings and way more situations, right? So it really depends at the levels of how your mixed flexibility could be. The cons is also you don't really have that much work ownership versus in academia. You have your own, in academia, you have a research agenda that feels really true to what you want to do in research. In industry, while I love public media, there was this sort of still component of it have to be very much about content creation. And I wanted us to focus more on community-based work with families and creating resources and tools. So there was kind of like a tension between that. And so there's really not that much, I guess, ownership, unless you get to a director level position like I did, but it's still, you still sort of a struggle with a lot of, how to really create your own research agenda if you're interested in research, right? That was one of the reasons, like there's so many reasons why people go to industry or go to academia or back and forth. And that was also one of the reasons why I love public media and it's still a public media and PBS kids at heart and I still donate to them. I wanted to have more flexibility on the research that I wanted to do, specifically with that focus of Spanish-speaking Latino families. And so that was the decision that I took, but that doesn't mean I'm leaving the industry component, because like the skills that I gain, I could reframe them back to industry and get a job in industry or do the consulting job. So I always tell people, like, it's really how you sell yourself that makes a lot of difference.
Yeah, and you do have to also think about about your work ownership. So there was a number of like projects and research and things that I designed when I was with SEAL, and those are not mine. My name is not even on them.
Yes.
SEAL owns them, right? And they can do whatever they want with them. The other reason why I also decided to transition back to academia is because I had very little autonomy. So my contract had an exclusivity clause that said that I could not do any work outside of SEAL that seemed as competing with them, right? But people are looking for you for certain skills that you have, right? They hire me for certain skills, the same with consulting. And I couldn't do any of those projects, or I had to ask for permission to do those projects, right? And at times I wanted to work with a community that was like, okay, all we can afford is to give you a small stipend. And I would have been like, oh yeah, I can do that. And so it would be like, no, that violates your exclusivity clause. And we can't do a contract with them because for our time is not worth it. So you have to think about that as well. I also had to pretty much pursue my research separately, because if it doesn't fit with their mission, which is understandable, right? They don't want to do it. They don't want you spending time doing that, which again, understandable, but then you really have to think through what it is that you want to do. Any questions about these pros and cons or other things that you want to share specifically to you? Okay, so we're going to go on to learning objective number 2, and I'll let Susie do that while
I guess it's just the title, like we just want to explain how to reframe those skills that we've been talking a lot about, how to think about getting to know yourself and what are your skills that you bring. I mean, a lot of the times I think as humans, we are very uncomfortable with owning our skills or the things that we sort of kind of been picking up throughout our life. And it's really hard to say, hey, I know how to do focus groups, or I know how to do interviews. And that can translate into UX research, right? That's like understanding a user experience, and it's just a way of reframing that. So like if you did a project in your master's where you were interviewing families, how can you reframe that to a different component in your resume specifically? So I don't know if I think this is your scoop.
Yeah. So I'm going to share you this a really quick video of like what's a resume versus a CV, and all of you might know this, but it's very quick, and then we'll go on to show you some examples and give you time to think through them. And I will keep sharing all the mistakes I made while I was, noticing that. Okay. So I'm going to reshare this because I don't think you can hear the sound.
Assistant, and
you all hear it? Is that here?
So you're asked to submit a CV for a job application. Maybe you're thinking, what is a CV and how is it different from a resume? Let us help you with a quick overview of resume versus a CV. Typically, the key difference between a resume and a CV is that a resume is a concise summary of one's experience in a variety of categories, while a CV emphasizes a more detailed account of one's academic-related experiences. Also, an entry-level resume tends to be one page, while a CV is usually multiple pages. Okay, so now maybe you're wondering, how do I know which one to use? CV stands for curriculum vitae, which is Latin for the course of your life. What this means is that a CV is literally your life story. In some countries, the term CV is used synonymously with resume. However, in the US, these tend to be very different documents. Here's how. The CV goes the extra mile to highlight not just work experience and education, but also awards, honors, publications, conference presentations, achievements, affiliations, skills, and more. These extra categories highlight skills most relevant to academic settings, which is why the CV is most beneficial for graduate school applications. It is also used by people with or pursuing advanced degrees, such as graduate students and postdoctoral scholars. On the other hand, a resume is more focused on relevant workplace skills, which are demonstrated through experiences such as jobs, internships, volunteering, and extracurriculars. Undergraduate students and graduates with early careers are typically expected to submit a resume when applying to jobs in industry, nonprofits, and the public sector. The bottom line is, if you are an undergrad and an employer asks you for a CV,
I messed up there because the rest is just doesn't apply to any of you. But so just a couple key points. And this is, again, a mistake that I made. I just submitted my CV, my like 13-page CV. You know who wants to look at a 13-page CV in non-academia? Nobody. So limit to 2 pages. And 2 pages is already pushing it for some places. And the cover letter is never optional. Even if the posting says cover letter optional, it's never optional. I've hired lots of people, Susie has too, and the cover letter is never optional. So you always want to include a cover letter. And this is where you have that opportunity to say, right, if you're doing focus groups, if let's say you presented at a conference, you presented your master's thesis, you could say, that you know how to collaborate, that you know how to design presentations to present to large audiences, that you know how to build trust, right? Doing interviews with people and doing focus groups takes a lot of building trust really quickly, right? Especially maybe if you're like in finance, right? Like that trust is important. If I'm going to trust you with my money, like I better trust you. So if you know how to do all those focus groups and you know how to quickly build trust with people, right? You are comfortable talking to large audiences. You're comfortable explaining complex complex concepts. So you want to take all of those things that you've done and think about and put them in. It's like translating, right? You're taking all these like academic jargon that we get taught and translating it to a way that other people can understand. And I'll let Susie talk about this, like the value, because she knows more about that. Susie, you're muted.
Oh, thank you. I was like, one of the things that I learned throughout my industry experience in public media, but also as I grow and I was hiring people and looking at their resumes and looking at their CVs, I agree with Lupe. I honestly, when I hire people, I would really like to see the cover letter because I wanted to me, what the cover letter told me was, will they be a fit within our team, right? Because in the resume, it tells me they can do the things, they have the skills to do the work, but the cover letter to me is more like a storytelling tool where I can learn whether that person will be a good fit with the team and with everybody else. And so something for you to think about when you're writing a cover letter, really, and we can share examples describing what you can do. And the value that I learned was to really this idea of quantifying your experience, right? So like really saying, hey, I went from being a one-person team member and leading an 100K budget department to having 10 people in the department and growing the budget from like 100K to $4.3 million, right? But also it could be really simple to like making sure that you deliver 20 workshops with parents every month or every year, or making sure that you created 3 sets of curriculums that now it's being implemented by the organization. So really this idea of like the organization wants to see what you can bring to their organization that is going to be an added value to them. So very different than in academic settings when you're sort of highlighting yourself and how awesome you are as a researcher and like all the stuff that you can bring and your certifications and your awards and things that you won, right? Like in academic, people want to see that. In industry, as a director, I was not interested about that. I was interested in like whether that person is going to be a good fit in the department and whether that person is going to deliver and what I need, which is doing a pre and post evaluations, making sure that they're managing the budget, like Lupe mentioned, making sure that they know how to put a budget together. And so it's very, very different. And we'll show you a little bit of examples on how we reframe those skills from your master's or even your bachelor's into a job that you can really sell again yourself.
So there's a question in the chat about like, what if their program is not very research heavy and they don't like research? Are there, like you just like stab their hearts? Okay. But it's like, are there other skills from graduate school that you could be useful? So yeah, if you know how we all sometimes have to write papers with other people in our classes, use that as an example, right? So when I write letters of recommendation for my students, and they've done a group project within my course, I'm watching what role they're taking, and I will write something like, they took the lead in this paper and they were able to delegate and manage people, and they delegated and supervised like other students and the other members in their group, and they worked well with them. So use those things that you all have, that we all kind of have to do in the classroom, like the papers that you write, the group projects that you do, as examples as well of how you developed all those skills. Even better. So she said, my program is in Spanish. I work tutoring students. So tutoring students I'm just reading the text. She likes working behind the scenes in higher ed, doing all the paperwork. You know how many people like to do paperwork? Very few. So highlight that, how much you love doing the data and developing projects. There is definitely things like that in the nonprofit, people who do that paperwork, collect the data, help develop projects. There is a lot of opportunities for that because most people don't want to do the paperwork. Very few want to do all those logistics. So yes, definitely highlight all of that.
I would highlight that in public media, before I left, I was actually looking for a project coordinator to just take care of all the admin stuff. So I would encourage you to look into project coordinator positions that is administrative level, or project management positions that is admin project management, versus your project management for like, I don't know if you're familiar with like, what would be like a project management for like a company, right? Like it's a little bit running projects versus the admin. So that, like Lupe said, I didn't like doing admin. My team did not like doing admin. So I advocated for a position to hire someone strictly to be behind the scenes and run every administration component that we were going to need. And so that is a valid that you can totally transfer those skills. And Lupe shared my resume here. So this is my last resume that I did before I went into academia, where I was public media at PBS. And you can kind of see a little bit of a difference than other resumes. And I'll show you another one too, and as well as your CV in academia. But one of the things that I would also look into when hiring people would be your objective. Like, why, like in a quick 1 or 2 sentences, tell me who are you, so that I can kind of get to know you really quick, right? Versus, again, people are not really interested in like, tell me how awesome you are in academia. Here's like, what can you do that is going to help the organization sort of like grow and expand? And so you want to say things like, you know, you have led the development and implementation and execution of public media early childhood initiative, right? Like that's what they care. If I were to apply to another director position or a VP position, they would just care about that. They're not interested about my research. They're not interested about all of that. They just want to see, can you run and execute a vision that we have on an organization? And so then my summary qualifications can tell that to the industry. I can run, I can program, I can project manage, and I can execute the vision because I have business development skills. I know how to cultivate relationships. I do program design. I know fiscal and grant project management and so on. And I'm also bilingual. I speak both English and Spanish, which is a skill that I think we don't really highlight, but is really needed. And then you go into your education.
So, Susie, we have about 15 minutes. So I'm going to go move on to the next one. But before I want to highlight something on, remember when Susie talked about quantifying your experience? So that is an example here, right? You grew the department from 1 to 10 in 7 years and serving more than 50 community partners, right? So that is really quantifying the skills that she did. And I'll let you talk about.
And Tarana, and this was a little bit different because Tarana was a recent graduate. But if you scroll down to 2017 and 2014, those 2 sections are her dissertation. But if you look at, and I think you have access to these documents, right? If you go back to that document and look at that section, she wrote it in a way that it was quantifiable, right? So if you go a little bit up, Lupe, she talks about how she led a 10-month longitudinal study that surveyed undergraduates through online service, right? She didn't say, I'm doing my dissertation, my PhD dissertation, I'm doing this project. She just really quantified it in a way that I was like, oh, this resume is telling me that this person can run the evaluation that I need at the job that she's applying for. And so very specific. So you could also frame it, whether you're doing your master's and you're learning to do literature review, like Lupe mentioned, like what are the things that can tell me that you're moving from like a student to like an actual knowing how to do the job. This is a great example to go back and look at. And then Lupe has one more.
I don't think they have access to this, but we can send the coordinator of the program this presentation, and then you can just click on the links and access them, or let us know if you want them and we can just email them to you. But if you see here too saying like design surveys on Qualtrics, right? So this lets me that you know how to pick up on a program, and you know how to design those kind of things. A lot of people don't. This is anonymous. This anonymous one, I don't, it's from a person that interviewed at a position. I love this resume. So this is a person who has a PhD and tons of like work experience. And I love the way that they just that you just kind of like has a very summary of like what she's done, the roles. And in this side over here, very, very briefly, she's like, this is who I am, right? I'm an expert evaluator. I'm a storyteller. right? So I've never, until I think I saw this, I've never thought of myself as a storyteller. But, when I write papers, when I'm doing presentations, that is storytelling, right? So think about that. And then she has like this key skills, right? So study design, data collection, qualitative methods, the statistical comparisons, like what are your key skills that you can put in there? Then she listed like different projects, and, like her education was like over here on the side, and this is when she was a student, and look here, train 6 research to use qualitative software. So if some of you are supervising undergraduates, talk about that you train them, that you supervise them. As grad students, sometimes we are the ones who are doing all the work and the supervision of those 20 undergrads, right, that our professors have. So talk about that. And, and then she just listed some publications and presentations. So, we'll share this with you so you have an idea, you can take a look at them again. But, those are kind of the things that you want to see, like think through who are you and what are the key points, and quantify those skills. There's a lot of things that you do as grad students that are interesting. So we want to give you a chance to think through like what are some skills that you have and how you can change them. Right. So instead of saying like, I wrote a master's thesis, you say I was a project lead, like you led that project. That's all on your own with often very little support. I had a colleague of mine who was a program manager in our department, and she was managing about 40 participants in our research project, and she wanted to go into social work. So when she wrote her cover letter, we talked about that as case management, because that's what she was doing, right? She was following up with families. She was sending them resources. She was making sure that they were getting their stipends, that they were filling out the forms that they needed to fill out. So we want to give you a chance. So I'm going to stop sharing for now and give you a chance to think through what are some skills that you have that you can translate, and then we'll go back and share them. In the meantime, Susie, could you repeat again the language for the positions that you would look at as nonprofits for, like the administrative piece and the project manager? I think you mentioned certain positions.
The project coordinator, right? Like, but it would be like project, you would look at under admin. And I think sometimes we also need to learn how to read between the lines, if that makes sense. A lot of the times the position would say project lead or project manager. And then you have to read what are they asking, because in the description, it will tell you, oh, this is very administrative work, so I want to do it. Or this is going to be you leading all the project meetings, and that's going to be very, very hard. Oh, there's a question. Oh, yes, I think Lupe is going to follow with that as well. But yeah, we can definitely share about that. But it's just like a matter of really, like I said, reframing those skills and think, like Lupe mentioned, think about what you're doing currently right now and how you can quantify it, but also reading the job description and making sure that you're modifying it. You could also, this is one of the things that I tell people that sometimes people forget. It's like, read their job description and use those words that they use and figure it out whether that's what you are doing currently, right?
I put our emails on the chat. Sorry, Susie. I put our emails on the chat if you want to follow up with us. We're happy to take a look at I'm happy to take a look at something. I'm not going to volunteer Susie to do that. But if you want to reach out to us, go ahead and reach out to us. If you have questions, we can take a look at, if you have a quick question or a resume that you want us to take a peek at, we're happy to do that. So sorry, Susie, continue.
Oh no, that was it. I was trying to find.
You're done. Okay.
Trying to find an example of a job right now that at my previous job, the recruiting, and sort of kind of give you an example of like what are they looking for and how you can sort of change it to make sure that it meets your sort of needs, if that makes, or what you're doing currently, if that makes sense. But there's really not that much. So here's an example. They're hiring for a coordinator / production management. So that sometimes makes you feel like, oh, that doesn't give an example, but they're asking that their primary duties is assisting and organizing travel and location needs for production. So that already tells admin work.
Susie, can you put, is that an actual job opening? Can you put it on the chat? This might be something that they're interested in. I am gonna put we have to give you a like feedback survey. So if you can fill that out, that's also in the chat. Anybody has anything that they want to share or skills that you came up with that you're like, I think this is something that I could do, or some that you have a question? See in the chat. Okay, so we just want to give you a couple of just last few tips. Okay, so take opportunities to practice grant writing, right? That is something that is also going to be important in any place you go to. And take opportunities to learn different skills, right? Also build your network, build relationship. Start with your LinkedIn. When you're looking for jobs, tell everybody you're looking for jobs. Everybody that you know, send them an email and be like, hey, you know, I'm looking for this positions like this. Here is my resume. Send inquiry emails, do, you know, informational interviews, and take advantage of the workshops in practical skills, things like media, Excel. You know, I know the Faculty Development Center offers workshops for faculty, but I've gotten emails from professors that are like, hey, can my student attend your workshops on qualitative methods? And I'm like, yeah, have them come and attend. So take advantage of those. They are available through the Faculty Development Center. Usually faculty, we don't say no to including grad students. At least I don't say no to including students in the workshops that I give. Susie, any other ones?
No, I would also say like create your own website, right? Like when you can sort of start selling yourself and market yourself, so that if you're interested in consulting jobs, if you create a LinkedIn profile, you can share, oh, I'm looking for consulting opportunities. Here's what I do, and share that website instead of your resume, because again, a lot of the times people are not really interested in reading lots and lots of pages. But if you have a really nice website that can highlight who you are, that's really helpful as well.
Okay, so please fill out the website just so they know that, you know, we did give you the website, the feedback survey. I put it in the chat. If you have any questions, let us know. We are going to put our emails here. I know we gave you a lot of information, but again, you know, I'm always happy to look over, I don't know, if you have a resume that you're like, hey, I'm not sure how to frame this, can you give me some ideas? Or if you're like, hey, I'm trying to connect with people that do, I don't know, like with Carlos, right? He wants to do finance, and we just happen to know a few people who are in finance. So we're happy to share our connections with all of you. That's, you know, use us as a resource. That's what we're here for. I'm on campus in the Education Classrooms building. And Susie sometimes comes over and visits, but feel free to send emails. And again, we're happy to help. You know, we've been through this process. We know sometimes it can be overwhelming. So, you know, we're here to help you navigate. I'm going to put our emails on the chat again. And if you have any questions, that's all we had to share with you today.